So before we start this one, I want to say that I believe that this is kind of a poorly crafted question in that you're not really given a clear idea of how you need to solve for it. This one's kind of an outlier. Normally the problems are much more straightforward and very well written. This one's just an exception. So hang with me here. I'm going to show you the solution and just understand that this one's an exception. It's a little odd. Just hang with me. So total sales of the desert markets were 10,150,000 2 years ago, 14,250,000 last year. If the same trend continues, what are sales likely to be this year to the nearest $1,000? Alright, so pull out your equations. They ask you to figure out what sales are likely to be this year. So sales for this year are going to be equal to, and this you should be familiar with by now, last year's sales plus whatever growth we project, right? So if we think we're going to sell 5,000 more or something like that, that would be our projected sales. Now we find our projected sales by taking our sales from last year and estimating by how much they're going to grow. So what's our market share factor? So we multiply by our market share factor. Now here's the tricky part. We're going to say sales for last year, so sales for last year, minus our sales from 2 years ago equals sales for last year times market share factor. Okay, so I think this is just the tough part because it's not really ever shown to you in another example. But it kind of makes sense, right? So if you think about it, we find next year's sales by saying, hey, how much do we expect to grow by? Let's add that to this year's sales. So it's the same thing happening here. They're saying, okay, well, if we take the difference of last year sales and the sales 2 years before, we know that's going to be equal to the sales last year times the market share factor. So that's the kind of confusing part. All right, so let's plug in the information we know. We know that the sales last year were 14,250,000, and we know that the sales 2 years ago were 10,150,000. So that's going to be equal to the sales from last year times the market share factor, but I don't know the market share factor, so I have to leave that. I have everything else filled in now, so I can solve for market share factor. Just do your normal equating here. So you would start maybe by simplifying this. So 14 million minus the 10 million comes up to what? 4,100,000. And then you would divide by this 14,250,000 to solve for market share factor, which is equal to 0.2877193. Okay, so we've just found our market share factor. Now the whole point of finding that was so that we could take this number and use it to help us figure out what our projected sales are. So our projected sales are going to be equal to our sales from last year, which is our 14,250,000, multiplied by our market share factor. And you'll notice that I did not really round here. I left several digits in the market share factor. Cutting off digits just makes our answer less accurate and more likely to be incorrect when we get to the end. So remember, always wait till the end of the question to round. Okay, so we take our projected, we multiply, and we get 4,100,000 for projected. Now that we have projected, we can plug it into our sales for this year. So we are projecting that we are going to add 4,100,000 sales onto what we did last year. So last year we did 14,250,000, and we're projecting that will add an additional 4,100,000. Take the total, and we'll find that our sales for this year are equal to $18,350,000. Okay, so thanks for sticking with me on that one. Again, I know that one was a little odd. Hopefully it made sense once we went through it. Always contact me if you have any questions or come across any other problems that you think might be unique or have unique solutions.